Hello and welcome to Think Fit, Be Fit podcast. My name is Jennifer Schwartz. I'm the hostess and creator of this podcast and podcast network. Think Fit, Be Fit is the intersection of exercise mechanics, movement expertise, and embracing curiosity. This ongoing conversation about the nuances of training will help trainers, coaches, and fitness lovers connect deeper to their exercise and the process of exercise science. Some of these podcast conversations truly stimulate my own professional and self-development. This conversation with Seth Blee is definitely one of those deep dives that created a to-do list of questions to ask, things to read, and ultimately generate an ongoing conversation, which is like candy to me and ultimately the goal of this podcast network. Seth Blee, who is a doctor of physical therapy, runs the physical therapy side of Inova's sports medicine program, which is close to 20 clinics, and the physical therapist is the physical therapist for the Washington Nationals and the Washington Spirit. Seth has completed extensive continuing education and coursework and training and is one of the principal instructors at the Institute for Physical Arts. One of the main topics of this episode is Seth's unique approach to physical therapy. You will hear us mention some of these techniques such as PNF, dry needling, and neuromuscular control. If you are a trainer or strength coach, a student, a therapist of any kind, this is obviously a podcast for you, as Seth is a teacher, a manager, and a learner. We can all learn so much from him. If you are invested in your training process, I think this episode will be worth your time because it's an inside look into how the best and most engaged PTs think and operate. Rather than thinking about like the multi-million-dollar arms he rehabs or keeps healthy, or his role in quarterbacks Alex Smith's incredible rehab story, think about the possibility of resolving ambivalence in the injury care process. And two, think about collaborating and open-mindedness to evoking change outside of the traditional paths. And before we start this interview, I'm very excited to present our new affiliate, which is Ladder. And that is LeBron James, his supplement company that he started with his trainer. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is even in the expert, team that came up with this line of clean performance products, and they have really high standards for quality and safety. They have pre-workout, different proteins, 2 different proteins, a greens drink. Anyways, you can support the podcast by using the code BFIT10, which will give you 10% off. And then you can also save more when you subscribe. Go to ladder.sport and use the code BFIT10 in all caps. I just have a few more thoughts before we start the interview. I said, earlier that these conversations really stimulate my thought and drive my own self-development, professional development. And Seth Blee, I've already given you his intro, but I also want to say he was on the E60 ESPN documentary of Alex Smith and his incredible rehab journey. So that will be in the show notes, along with some blogs that he's written and a couple other podcasts that he was on. I'm very excited to share this with you because it's his work is something I aspire to. Not that I'm a physical therapist, but the way that he works, not exactly who he works with, which is the best of the best, professionals wise. And it's more about the approach, and that he speaks as if the work he does is like natural and even typical, but it's not. He's working within physical therapy as this art and science application while sharing this openness. And I really, truly admire it. And, thinking about and learning about these approaches might be one of the best things you can do for yourself, so that you can engage in a therapy process and relationship and create long-lasting changes for yourself. So, like I said, this podcast is dedicated to that ongoing conversation and effective thinking, so that we can all have potent exercise, which is a move, a really big shift away from the conversations about our bodies that are binary and black and white. This is good for you, and it's good for the same, another person, the same program. And that type of approach to fitness is outdated. It doesn't work for very long. And I am so excited that we can tell these stories through conversations like this. And, the bottom line is the knowledge is not enough. The the letters behind your name aren't enough. It's how you apply the knowledge, how you are a learner, how you are a thinker. And that is just, to me, like the future of this field, sports medicine and staying fit, which I call performance wellness. Anyways, if you would like to hang out with us on Instagram at thinkfitbefit_podcast, or on Facebook, where we've been going live at least once a week at ThinkFitBeFit Podcast on Facebook. We also have a newsletter that is at thinkfitbefitpodcast.com, where we spend some time helping you dive deeper into these concepts and apply them and offer freebies. So that's every month we're offering that kind of stuff and that kind of advice. So that is pretty valuable, and I really enjoy doing that for you guys. I think it's really useful. If you are learning something from this podcast, please reach out, let us know, or leave a review on iTunes that just tells, the audience what you're learning and why it's refreshing and why it's important for you to have a new outlook on fitness. So, anyways, like I said, I can't wait to hear from you and what you're learning. I am so excited. Thank you for being here for this wonderful conversation with Seth Blee, the physical therapist for the Washington Nationals and the Washington Spirit. You can find all his information in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here on Think Fit Be Fit podcast, where we are dedicated to effective thinking for potent exercise, whether you're a coach, a trainer, or just a movement lover, exercise lover. We really have something in common, which is what we want to connect deeper with our movement and perform better. So I have Seth Blee with me, who is a physical therapist who runs the Inova sports medicine physical therapy, and the head PT for the Nationals baseball club and the Washington Spirit. And you may have seen him recently on ESPN with Alex Smith, right? Yeah. And personally, I love sports documentaries, and that, I got really excited about that one because it was just a side that you don't normally see. So that's on ESPN 60 documentary, I believe. But please introduce yourself, Seth, and tell us. I'll follow up with another question. Sorry.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Jen. I look forward to talking on this. So yeah, as you said, I'm a PT. I've been a PT for about 22 years now, and I've worked with a lot of different patient populations, but spent the most of my time in my profession in orthopedics and primarily in sports, especially the last several years, definitely in the sport. You talk about gap between a little bit of the PT and the performance side. I've worked with some great strength coaches over the last handful of years, from strength coaches with teams to some that I work with in my clinic. So I've gotten to see that side of things and all the different aspects that go into treating an athlete. I work alongside, in the clinic, I work alongside some strength coaches, and it's mostly PTs, but in the team settings that I'm in, I also work alongside athletic trainers and chiropractors and massage therapists, and really try to have a pretty holistic approach to try to treat the entire athlete. Mm-hmm. So I do spend a good amount of my time with the teams. I do run our clinics. We have 18 outpatient clinics, so I do a good amount of integrative things as well. And probably my biggest passion that I enjoy doing is I also teach a lot to PTs throughout the country, not just PTs, but primarily PTs. And I'm sure we'll get into some of the coursework and things like that as we go.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's just so jazzed to have you here. I've had 3 physical therapists on, and they each have had something entirely unique to bring to the table. And I'm just wondering, when we're going to start using different terms for physical therapists, because as I'm standing where I'm standing, I see such a diversity within the profession. Where do you kind of fit in with the Institute for Physical Arts? Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you've done with them?
Sure. Yeah. There's a very wide range of PTs absolutely out there, and from specialty populations they treat to just types of practices that they're in. And I've been fortunate enough to be introduced to the IPA, or the Institute of Physical Art, early on in my career, just through continuing ed courses. And as I started to practice longer and longer and take more and more courses, I started to take all the IPA's courses and really get mentored by some of the great instructors there. And I continued to take courses. I wound up going through 2 certification processes through manual therapy certifications, and then started to teach with the IPA back in 2006. So I teach a lot of courses. A lot of them are based in a PNF foundation. So it's manual therapy. I used to think that manual therapy was the same regardless of who you did it on, but it's definitely different if you think you work more with an orthopedic population, a neurologic population, a sports population. We have the same principles of how we treat, but obviously you have to incorporate what you're doing manual therapy wise into what they then need to do when they leave your clinic. And that's where you kind of have to bridge that gap between the hands-on treatment and getting them up off the table and actually starting to train them to do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. So you mean exposing them to different environments, or more like different movements? When you say get up, yeah.
I think different movements and different challenges. And that's, as a manual therapist, that's challenging for us because, so much of the time when a patient comes in the clinic, a patient, an athlete, whatever, first thing is we evaluate something, we get them on the table, and we just start working. And I think so many times people then will, the patient gets up off the table and you're done. And then it's, go about your day and hopefully that's better. And for me, one of the challenges is doing what we need to do on the table, but then also getting up and incorporating that into, we just did all these things to free up different soft tissues that might have been limiting your mobility. And then we got things to activate, to engage different muscles. Now, when we come in and we get into a running position or a single leg stance or throwing position, how does everything now get integrated and get reconnected to the system? And it's not just you get off the table and you leave the clinic, but we need to be able to build on that and show that now you have the mobility and you have the strength, but can you actually use it properly?
Yeah, from like a motor control place, I'm thinking, is that like, having somebody study for a test, just so the example, the picture I have in my head is, just getting the manual therapy, just quote unquote loosening stuff up, and then getting up and expecting your body just to, know it and use it. Is that, just like throwing a bunch of flashcards at yourself before a test and then being like, I got it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the good things that I should probably mention in kind of framing our thought process is, so with the IPA, which we talked about, we basically have a treatment philosophy and 3 treatment pillars. And that's how I look at patients. And that is, no matter who you're treating, who you're talking about, we look at 3 main areas. Their mechanical capacity to move, do they have the mobility from joints, soft tissues, fascia, everything that needs to be able to move? Do they have the neuromuscular function to actually use the right muscles at the right time and have the right activation patterns? And that comes into a lot of our PNF. And then the third is motor control, is how do we put that together and actually use our bodies? And I think there's a lot of people that will only treat the mechanical and do tons of soft tissue work and joint work and not really then address the other 2. Or some will just strengthen and try to strengthen their way out of problems. And if you're not really getting the mobility and retraining the body how to use, you're really missing the boat. So I think you have to look at all 3 of those components when we're looking at an athlete, at a patient, at anyone.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of number 2. But I'm totally, fine with saying that, I got you. Yeah. Okay. Man, got to do some editing. Okay. So, all right. I think that this Bluetooth thing died. Okay. So I come from a strength background for sure. And a lot of what I'm seeing these days is, something called the FRC, functional range conditioning. Have you came across that yet?
I have. I certainly won't say that I'm an expert in it, but I am aware of it. Yes.
And it's like I watch, and I've seen it from one side, which is I've been using isometrics for a long time, not quite end range like the FRC does, but like, it's almost like they're really trying to translate it like directly and very quickly. And I'm definitely curious about it. So, it's just kind of like a thought out there in my head. The other thing
it's interesting. Again, I'm not an expert in that area at all, but like I said, my background's really PNF, and that's how we do a lot of our facilitating, the right muscles to work and how to strengthen and control things. And I've seen in my career so many new things come up, and when you break them down, I think like, well, yeah, we've been doing isometric holds and end range holds and moving in and out of those end ranges since PNF started in the 1940s, but yet somebody packages it a little bit differently and they say, we've got this brilliant new idea. And I had somebody come to me and say, I found this trainer and they're doing all this with these spiral component movements and all these 3-dimensional movements. I said, yeah, we've been doing that for a while. So I think there's a lot of great concepts. People are just repackaging them a lot differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and like the thing that I think makes, physical therapy more the lane is that you guys can, fully assess, fully clear someone for working at end range, because I don't know, it might not be the right thing all the time. I'm okay with a half rep, if that's where it's going. Right. And I guess it always goes back to, looking at the foundations and, so let's kind of get back to that. What have you been recently doing as far as teaching? Because that must have changed in the last 6 months.
A lot. Yeah. To give you an idea, pre-COVID, I would teach I probably averaged 1 weekend a month where I would travel and teach a course somewhere in the country. And that would be to anywhere from, 15 to 40 or so therapists that would come to a certain area, and we would put on 2 or 3 or 4 day courses. I have not done one of those since COVID. I did do a virtual one. Now, I've done several virtual lectures, but as far as a continuing ed course, I did a virtual version of one of my courses. And the nice thing was we had, I think we had 100 people in it, or 95 or something like that. So in that one time, we were able to reach as many people as we would in several courses, even though you definitely lose something by not being hands-on and being able to quite teach it the same way. But unfortunately, that's the way that we get out there and teach. So that's all that I've done since Inova started. We're in the process of planning classes for next year, and we definitely hope to have a good amount of in-person ones too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to get back into some in-person continuing ed. I missed one in April, and we did it online, and it's I really like the minds that come to continuing education. Like there's just such especially in the strength coach world, because if I'm connecting with that person, we're talking about the philosophies and the continuous improvements, and what curves happen within these transitions of injury to being fully functional and fully engaged with your exercise or your sport. And I'm getting some of that on the podcast, but it's not quite the same. And then what, so the term active recovery, so when we talk about like new and like shiny things, I feel like this is one of those that has, maybe it got really popular as the Normatec boots got popular, and like the different percussion guns. I don't know where it came. Maybe it was Kelly Starlett with his book, but have athletes, even at this like high level that you're working at, do they come in knowing about recovery? Are you like teaching it, or like where's that?
Yeah, so we see a lot of different levels of athletes in the clinic. I mean, I still have some little league kids and some youth athletes up through middle school, high school, and ultimately to the pros. I would say most of the pros kind of have their thing already. And I'll usually feel them out a little bit and say, so what's your post game like? What do you like to do? And, they might be a contrast bath person, or this is a go for a flush run type of a person. And to some extent, when you get to the pro level, they've earned their right to say, this is what works for me. And then sometimes we can just offer suggestions. It's nice when you can somewhat mold that when you get some of the younger athletes in there too, because they often don't know a whole lot about it, or they got something that their parents told them that they used to do, which was, has been completely disproven in the world. I still get kids that say, oh, so every time after I throw in a baseball game, I come in and, my dad says I should just ice my shoulder and I should do all this. And when I say, well, we probably don't ice that much. And then we talk about that, and it blows to people's minds when they haven't really looked into some of the research behind recovery modalities.
Yeah. I read this book called Good to Go, which was about recovery. I just
read that. Yeah. I read that recently, yeah.
I like the beer story. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, that hasn't been proven to be super effective. We would all although I think it was more effective for female athletes than males.
Yeah. I also, that was also something Arnold Schwarzenegger used to say. He used to drink beer after his training. That's really? Pumping Iron, the movie, anyway, his documentary. So speaking of, did you watch the ESPN Alex Smith
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the down things about COVID. Not that there's not a million of them, but I know Alex had said for a while, he wanted to have a big watch party at his house and get all of his, his healthcare team together. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. So I watched it with my family here. It was pretty wild. They had, talking with Stefania Bell, who's the one who put it all together. They had something ridiculous like 50 plus hours of footage that they put into 45 minutes of material. So it was interesting because I know when Stefania was in the clinic and we were doing my interviews and she was filming some therapy sessions, we probably had 3+ hours of footage of PT. And I asked her, I said, so is this going to be like 20 seconds? And she said, yeah, probably. So we were sitting around waiting to see when we were going to get into his rehab. And that happened in the last couple minutes of it.
Yeah. Well, your cameo was pretty cool. It was that mindset. And, if I had seen that as a young, student, that would have gotten me pretty psyched, to see that, so, that I think, beyond the teaching, I think that's going to really spark some minds because, so many of our colleagues in this performance world, we have a really good experience with our trainers and our therapists. And, it's just, I don't know, it's just great to be on the, I have a few people that I've mentored over the years, and it's just good to be on that side of it. And that's something you do as a manager and I'm sure as a teacher, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you have to obviously wear a lot of different hats. And I think, the clip that they put in the E60 show, talking about Alex was talking a little bit about his mindset. And I'm certainly not a mental coach or a sports psychologist by any means, but, as a strength coach, as a trainer, as a PT, you have to be able to understand that and how to relate to people and how to challenge somebody, but not, overwhelm them. So I think, people that work with clients or patients every day, they need to understand that that's a huge component of what we do.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, yeah. And with having so much hands-on time with your athletes, do you see mindset changes often?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. What, and so speaking of, can we talk about that course you mentioned on our initial phone call, the optimization? Sure. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the course that you're talking about is one that I put together about 4 years ago or so called Strategies for Optimizing Performance. And, I've done a lot of other courses, things like, you're probably familiar with, and your listeners are probably familiar with things like FMS and SFMA and different movement screens. And one of the things that I wanted to look at was, could we look at how somebody moves from a little bit more of a PNF base and a little bit more of looking at their alignment and their position and how that drives how they actually move, and how, we don't just look at posture for the sake of posture and treating pain, but how does this impact movement strategies, and how do we then, see somebody with this type of a movement strategy and train them to move more efficiently. And one of the other things I talk about in that class in the beginning is, as I was talking about those 3 pillars, you'll see a lot of people that will do, especially in a pro athlete setting, a ton of work to get more mobility, a ton of strength work, but really miss out on the control piece of it and the stabilization and the underlying control. And you were talking before about, how much range do you let somebody work into? I almost always say, we're going to do this into as much range as you can control. And that might be a couple of inches for somebody. It might be a complete squat or a full range of something else. And I think that's something that I try to get across in that class is really look at someone's movement strategies and how they control movements and how their postural biases and dysfunctions might impact what their movement strategies are, and then how we can train out of that. Yeah.
So meaning postural biases as to what's functional for them, or is it are you speaking about a screen?
So a little bit of both. I am looking at an alignment screen, and this comes from another course from the IPA that Vicki Johnson put together. Vicki Saliba Johnson. It's called the Saliba Postural Classification System, which we basically looking at somebody, and to really oversimplify things, just how do they line up? How does that thoracic cage line up over their pelvis? What are the angles of their body like? Because we know if they line up and they're lined up vertically stacked, your thoracic cage over your pelvis, and you're not too posteriorly tipped or anteriorly tipped, your muscles are going to respond better. So some of it is a screen, and we can look at them. We have some functional tests that we use to see how well their body responds. But then also just watching how they move. And I might see that this person is, an extremely extension biased person, that their first movement is always, hinge at that TL junction and go into extension. So what do I need to do, not only mechanical treatment wise, but how do I need to train them to make it so that they're driving with what we call a core first strategy, and stabilizing better or using their legs better. So it's not always hinging in what might be functional for them, but I would say is probably not the most efficient movement strategy.
How do you define the core?
How do I define the core? Mm-hmm. So the core, I'll define core muscles, and the way that I really try to keep it pretty simple when I explain it to patients is I say you basically have two types of muscles in your body. Whatever you've thought about, fast twitch, slow twitch, type 1, type 2, you have stabilizers, you have movers. And for me, your core are your stabilizers. Now, you have stabilizers at every joint. So it's not just, people think of core as your core around your abdominal area. Your rotator cuff is the core of your shoulder. Your deep rotators are the core of your hip. You have intrinsic foot core. So your core are your stabilizing tonic muscles.
I like this. I get different answers from everyone. That really it tickles my brain a little bit, because I've definitely we train a lot of foot muscles. We work with a lot of foot muscles in my domain, and there's something really special that happens when people can grab the ground better, and
Absolutely.
And like that changes the movement up the chain. I just had a golfer in here. We were just talking about this, and so when you're like thinking in this like postural way, it sounds like it's a layer deep than, I guess what I'm thinking of, what most people are familiar with is like when like a chiropractic approach where you stand on like two scales, and they kind of say your shoulders are here and your shoulders are there, or your hip is this way and your hip is that way. And that to me seems like a more structure-based approach, and this sounds different.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree with you. That looks at mechanical alignment, but that doesn't tell me if that's efficient for you or not. Because if you look at that, you could say somebody that has, let's say, a structural scoliosis and say, well, they're never going to be efficient. Well, we don't really look at just a plumb line, because everybody's efficient is going to be different. It's how does your body work? And if you've adapted to some of these dysfunctions that you might have, you might be more efficient in your, whatever your position is. So, we look and take like a snapshot. And I always say, when you're looking at somebody's alignment, that's like your hypothesis of how do you think they're going to function. But you then need to do some tests, and we'll do different things to see how does the core fire, how does the body handle a load, an external force. What happens if I push down on their shoulder girdle and do what we call a vertical compression test? How well is that weight distributed throughout their body? So I look at alignment because it tells me what I think is going to happen, but you don't know until you have some type of a functional test.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and that means like the movement, multiple things kind of moving at once versus just trying to find that one thing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Does your body respond well? And Vicki Johnson she came up with the term ACE, which stands for automatic core engagement. And what that means is when you're in an efficient alignment and let's say I push against your shoulders, your core should engage. You should kick in. right? Now, if you lift up your sternum and you're standing in a little bit of a posterior thoracic cage and I push against you, I'm knocking you right over. Mm-hmm. So there's different positions that the body is meant to function more efficiently in, and different ways that the muscles will respond better. So I want to see, does this person have that ACE? Do they have an automatic core engagement of their shoulder? Can I do different tests of their shoulder girdle to see, does that cuff stabilize? Does that foot stabilize when they go into single leg stance? How does their body respond? Not just what does it look like, and you should stand like this because that looks like you're more in alignment.
Okay. Yeah. I'm picturing someone sitting like on your exam table, and like you push one shoulder over and you're just kind of seeing what they do, basically. Or maybe even more functional.
More functional. And I tend to do it more standing because, what happens in sitting doesn't necessarily tell me what's going to happen when you go and run, or when you, swing a bat or do something else. So I want to put you in different positions and test to see how your body responds. How well do those tonic core stabilizers kick in whatever position that you need to be in? Because what we see with athletes, and I talk about this in my class a lot too, athletes are very good at training phasic muscles. It's way more fun to train fast twitch. We would always rather do a box jump or a ball slam than do like prolonged holds of something. That's just not as much fun. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have that underlying stability, then you can look, great and have great muscles and phasic muscles, but you can't use them very well. So you need those tonic stabilizers in order to be able to access your strength.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen it. And it's almost like, athletes are the great compensators. Like they have more strategies than I do, 100%. Yep. Or, not just in like, if we took like a corner and, we're like, we're going to teach you tennis. Like they would probably figure it out quicker than me. Right. And that's what I mean by like, they might be like the great compensators. They're able to like figure stuff out. And then when that kind of accumulates, they end up in your office.
Absolutely. Yeah. And hopefully I see them before. And, one of the terms that we talk about also in this class is that in order to be efficient, whether you're talking to athletics or dance or whatever, you need to have options for movement, right? And if you start to have these dysfunctions pop up and, now this is tight and I don't move very well, and now this hip doesn't extend very well, you start losing options for movement. Now, your best athletes are your best compensators, but you continue to compensate and you lose more and more options. Eventually, you can't do your thing you want to do anymore.
Yeah. Are you, how do you explain compensation to an athlete without putting fear into them?
Yeah, it's a good question because there's the mental side of it, and what I usually say is your brain is really good at figuring out the easiest way to do something. That might not always be the most efficient way, but it's easy for you. So just because that's easy, it might not be the best way that you can do it. So let's try to fine tune this and make it even more efficient. And that's where some of our tests and different things that we'll do manually will show the patient that, maybe I can be stronger if I'm in this position, or maybe it is easier for me to move if I, try to get these muscles to fire properly. So usually I look at it as, trying to make it the most efficient way that you can use your body.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me think of, the way that we use our words and the ethics when we're talking, to people that might have pain and they're focused on like a dysfunction, like they have a problem and their problem has to be solved. And How do you is that the kind of stuff that you work with different therapists? I mean, you must, because you probably work with a lot of young therapists. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say not just PTs, but even other healthcare providers that we work with. The terminology that you use is huge. And I'm a big advocate of being positive and trying to get patients to understand that you're trying to do everything to help them, but you're not necessarily just fixing things. Just to give an example, one of the things that drives me crazy is when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, my SI is out." And I say, well, your SI is not out. Maybe you're not moving as effectively at this joint as you could if we loosen up this muscle a little bit. But you didn't throw your back out, and your SI joint's not out. It's just we need to improve your movement a little bit better. So I think trying to get out of that mindset of I'm out, I'm broken, you need to fix me. That's not what.
I mean, it's in one way, like somebody comes in your office and you're like, they're kind of like, you've got the solution to my problem. And like, that feels good on one level from, the professional, from where I'm sitting. But on the other end, I'm like, I don't want you to come in here with such a predetermined, thing. We're talking about a body that, interacts with so many things, and there's so much going on. Like, how can you just think it's just this one thing?
Right. Yeah. And when they come in with that mindset of saying, I need you to fix me, that becomes a very passive relationship. And they're so dependent on you that they're never going to be able to fend for themselves. And we say in PT, yes, I want to help you to get better, but a big part of what I need to do is teach you how to take care of yourself. And if every, so often you need to come in and see me because you mess something up and you don't know what to do about it, then I've failed you as a therapist. We hear people say, I've got this great whatever type of provider. I've been seeing them for, 20 years. I usually say, well, that's a problem, because I don't want to see you for 20 years. I want to take care of your issue. And we might do some tune-ups down the line, but I want to be able to teach you what to do when you have issues and teach you how to use your body more efficiently so that you don't just have issues. If you need me to, do soft tissue work or dry needle or do some treatment technique over and over and over again on the same thing, well, I'm not really providing you a good service because I haven't fixed the issue in the first place. And I haven't addressed your movement inefficiencies, which is making that continue to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's one where language and integrative work can become really helpful or really like not. And I the active versus the passive. So let's touch on that a little bit. So a passive mentality coming into any training facility or treatment facility would be like, just fix me, what we just said. I think it could also, I would think dry needling would like really kind of reinforce that mentality.
And that's definitely passive. And, a lot of times patients will, it's kind of a big new thing in the public. So people will call and say, oh, I need to come in to get dry needling on this. Will you do this? And we'll usually say, well, yeah, there's a chance we might, but we're going to do a lot of other things too. And we need to evaluate to see if that's even appropriate and then, teach you what to do about it. So we may or may not dry needle you. And I'm certified. I use it a good amount, but certainly don't needle everybody. I don't even needle somebody every day because oftentimes, even if that's something that people think that they want, they may not understand why does this muscle keep tightening up. And by me dry needling let's say it's your trap that keeps getting tight. Yeah, I could needle that every day. And then you go to lift and you continue to be dysfunctional in how you move. It's going to tighten up again. So it's really like putting a Band-Aid on it. I'd much rather teach you how to move more efficiently so those dysfunctions don't continue to crop up.
Yeah, I feel like that conversation is hard, or I don't dry needle, to be clear, with people that with the shoulder dysfunctions and the shoulder pain, because it's just like, trying to give people like that full body picture, like, oh, your hips are part of this too. You know that? And that's never really changed for me. That is a tough conversation because it's a shift. It's a paradigm shift for a lot of people, and maybe even people in as a physical therapist. I don't know. Well, like we said earlier, there's so many different kinds of approaches now. Then when we say like the active approach, what do you mean by that?
So not just laying on my table and having me do something with my hands to you. It's always, if I have something that hurts, I would love to just come in and lay and have somebody do soft tissue work on me. That's great. I don't have to do anything. But even if I'm doing soft tissue work, we're combining things where I might, change the position somebody's in and have them pull up into a different position to activate this muscle to get it to release a little bit better. And then we got it to release. Now let's retrain that movement. I start doing some manual resistance. And then we come off the table and let's look at an exercise to build on that. So it's not just you're completely just letting me do everything. You have to be an active participant and start using your body after we get some of these gains. So again, some of the passive stuff is the mechanical treatment, but then do we get into that neuromuscular and retraining things to fire properly, and then get off the table, do some of our motor control training and figure out how to put that all together into something more functional. So not just staying there and having me do, joint mobilizations or dry needling or soft tissue work on you.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you see that carrying over to like that next level of self-agency? Like, because you just described like what I think is like 40 minutes of working with someone. What happens after that? Like, is it prehab? Like, what kind of things?
Yeah, so I think a big thing that has to happen is education, is to have somebody realize, I'm not just giving you an exercise because I feel like you should go and do a bridge, say, let's take something really easy, because I like bridges and it's a good, glute hamstring strengthening. That's not why I'm doing this. Maybe we have just, freed up your hip flexor and got you to move, and now you're learning to drive through your hips and to keep a neutral trunk. So now here's the couple of things that I want you to build on to do at home so that it reinforces everything that we just did in the clinic. And then when I see you in a few days, hopefully we're going to build on that. So having somebody understand why you're giving them something to do rather than just you're going to squat for the sake of squatting, or you're going to do, a certain exercise just because this is my favorite posterior chain exercise. Understand this is why we're building on what we just did and how you're going to maintain this. And I tell people, even if we've got a great manual therapist, if you leave my office and you go home and sit on your couch for the next 3 days, you're going to come in and you're not going to be any better than you were today. So you need to take ownership, own this new range, own this new movement strategy, and start building on this so that we can make some gains in the long run.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, is it like the talk, like I can tell when you do your homework, or is it, does it ever get more empowering than that? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and I'd say that's one of the nice things about working with your highest level athletes is you don't need to convince them to do something. If you can show them that if I put you in this position or we get these muscles working and you can see that you're stronger and you can do something better, then they're asking me what they should be doing at home. It's not me trying to explain, here's what you need to do for homework. It's, yeah, that felt awesome. So what do you want me to do today? Can I go do this tonight, or should I, so with a group like that, it's easier. For your maybe not as high level, maybe less motivated people, it's a little bit trickier. But yeah, that's the nice thing about working with athletes, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then can we go back to PNF a little bit?
Sure.
This is also for my professional development because, as you know, like I have an IPA trained physical therapist in my little studio, and PNF. So a lot of my peers and colleagues have been through like NASM when we were younger. And I definitely have some issues with a lot of NASM, but they taught a version of PNF, and I feel like it just is a little bit, and like the way that you and Jen refer to it is just completely different. So what do you have to comment about that?
Yeah, I would say even in the PT world, PNF is one of the most misunderstood things that's out there. Because if you ask, and we teach a lot of courses, and one of the first things I ask is to PTs even that have gone through, some amount of PNF training in school, say, what do you know about PNF? They all say patterns, right? It's diagonal movement patterns, and it went
like this thing.
Exactly.
Okay.
You're doing, pull the sword, or you're doing contract, relax techniques, or different things like that. And those are like tiny, tiny pieces of what PNF is. The way that I really oversimplify it for patients when they ask, I see you're going to teach this class, what is this? I usually say it's a hands-on, like manual therapy technique where we use our hands to try to get you to move better and to move more efficiently. Within that realm, there's a lot of different things that we can do. We can do, quick stretches to muscles and prolonged holds and shortened ranges. And we use irradiation by resisting different parts of the body to all work together and integrate better. Oftentimes we'll put patients in patterns because those three-dimensional movement patterns, like you're showing, are ways that the body gets different muscle systems to really work together and integrates better with the trunk. So we'll look at how can I facilitate more efficient movement, and that's really what PNF is. But you'll read an article even in Strength and Conditioning Journal, and they'll say, they did this PNF stretching technique versus static stretching, and all it is they did contract relax. So yeah, that's one technique of many, many techniques in the PNF toolbox.
Yeah, and just to kind of stir it up a little bit, I think that the NASM and the journal, the Strength and Conditioning Journal, have done a really good job to try and simplify our language, and I think it's done a disservice because something you just said, it just made me think we're sold this idea that our body's supposed to be a north, south, east, west machine, and no, it's not at all. It's birds don't do that. Birds don't. Right? Yeah, it's just not how it works.
We don't move in straight planes.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes makes me think that language thing again is just so important, and my professional view is that we as if we just say integrative sports medicine and performance, I just made up that term,
right.
If that is a thing, can we all speak the same language?
Yeah, it's tough, and I agree with you. It's even hard. I mean, within a PT clinic, you can have PTs that are trained in 5 different approaches, and they don't even speak the same language. Mm-hmm. So much less getting, different practitioners to speak the same language. Yeah, it's definitely challenging.
My other curiosity here is with using structural language and pain science language. And what I mean by structural language is for example, a chiropractor looking at a young lady and saying, wow, she needs an image done. And then we're in a structural conversation about someone's body, and they're moving not the best, but decent. And they, what is your thought on helping people understand mechanics and structure versus function?
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And, I was an athlete. I've had a lot of injuries, and early in my career when I was struggling with trying to figure out how to explain this to people, and they'd come in and say, well, I just had this image and I have, two herniated discs in my neck, so I shouldn't be doing this. And I could say, oh, I've got two pretty terrible ones too, and I have no pain, and I can move efficiently. So just because you have that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to interfere with how you move and how you function. And, I'll have somebody come in and say, well, I have this going on with this nerve or with this disc. And I say, well, that's fine. Fortunately, you don't have any disc symptoms and your issues are not nerve related. So I get that you have that. That's kind of an interesting thing that we need to keep in the back of our minds, but that shouldn't limit what we're trying to do right now. Now I have to educate you so that if at any point that we're doing things, here's some red flags to look out for. But if those aren't what you're experiencing right now, then I'm not really worried about what your MRI showed.
Yeah.
We had a pro athlete the other day that just came back from getting an MRI and it showed he had a pretty significant labral tear. And he said, yeah, but I've read about labral tears and that doesn't really limit me and I can do this and I can do that. So we're not really worried about that labral tear. So let's see how you function.
Yeah. He said that? Or you said that to him?
No, he said that he wasn't really that concerned because it wasn't limiting him.
Uh-huh.
And then we kind of beat on that. Yeah.
That's exciting to hear. I mean, that's, that is, yeah, I mean, there's just like a fine line between healthy curiosity with athletes and like I don't want to say type A, too focused on, things that they can control. And, yeah. And so that's like, it's just nice to hear that, there is some carryover into like what we're talking about and like how athletes are caring for their body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think by the time you get to, professional level, or you get your older athletes, they've had so many injuries that they know that they're pretty beat up and they know that this is torn and this is an issue, but they're okay and they're still playing their sport and they're able to go on. So they're ones that are not really focused on their, the dysfunction that they have. They're ones that you don't need to get into the pain science discussion all that much with.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. So what, have you thought about like writing a book or publishing in that way? Cause like you're just very unique, I think. And
well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have so many things on my list to do. I did publish a couple of chapters in a book, but it was on ACL stuff that I did a couple of years ago. But as far as kind of putting together this kind of big picture, yeah, I think it'd be fun, but I don't know. There's only so many hours. So I started with let's teach a class and see what type of response we get from this. And we've had great feedback from therapists that really see the need to incorporate all this. So I think that's where my initial push has been, and I've done that for several years now. So I don't know, maybe if I could find the time, I'd like to sit down and write. Yeah,
I mean, that's kind of where this little podcast was born, and now it's gotten kind of big, and I love it. And it was like, I just got some stuff I need to educate my clients on, and I'm just going to start, I'm just going to put it out there. And they're going to be like fake chapters. And that's kind of, that's where it started. But anyways, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. I am very curious because we've been studying, not me, there's a collective of people studying ACL, tears, reconstructions, and I would say even like a screening process for young athletes. And it doesn't seem like these numbers are going down. What do you think the future of ACL reconstruction or screening, where is it going? Because I don't know. I don't think like us saying like your hip and your core are weak, like is helping.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. And that's a long one, but that's a good one. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things to unwrap in that. One is, are you first of all, you can't prevent ACLs, right? You can reduce them, but all these ACL prevention programs, hopefully we can reduce them by educating people and training their bodies to be more efficient, and also training them to do different things. So you can go into that, that rabbit hole of specialization and overuse and overtraining and things like that, especially at a young age, which is a huge issue. But when you talk about ACLs, the biggest population you're going to look at is probably your adolescent female athletes. Mm-hmm. And that's actually the book that I co-wrote, is looking, I think, more at the motor control of how they actually use their bodies. So you can look at some tests and some training things like, your drop jumps and your step downs and your triple hops, and all of those things are important. But I think you really need to look bigger picture and look to see how do they actually use their bodies. Those are all very controlled, straight plane movements. That doesn't tell you what happens out on the soccer field when you're trying to cut and pivot and you've never really worked into, a valgus stress position before. So how does your body know how to actually do that? So how do we train them to introduce some of those stresses that they're going to experience on their field and not make it so sterile of, we're just going to do, these straight leg raises and these very specific exercises. They're just not very functional. So I think the more functional that we can get and the more different things that we can introduce that are closer to real life, the better that's going to be for people.
Yeah. What I was teaching was I was having the young ladies get into these like I would say like some type of athletic position and like kind of like a split squat or like standing on one leg. And I would have like partners pushing each other, and it made it kind of fun. Of course, once you start down that line with girls, they giggle and like, and that's a whole nother problem. But yeah, is this your first year with a professional soccer team?
Yes. I've worked with, so this is my first year with the Spirit. I spent a year a long time ago in Major League Lacrosse. I took care of a WNBA team several years ago, and then I just finished my 5th season in professional baseball. But I've dealt with pretty much every college sport there is. But yeah, it's my first season with pro soccer.
Yeah, they're a special group. I am of course a soccer fan, and they play some beautiful ball. Like, so whatever you can do to keep that going is just really good for my sportsmanship and excitement too. Yeah. I really enjoyed this. I think, this episode was kind of about me, because like these were my professional curiosities that I just brought to the table. So thank you so much for answering.
If it's your podcast, you can make it about whatever you want.
Yeah. I'm just glad everybody, kind of enjoys, I just truly believe that exercise has been sold, sports conditioning has been sold as 1 or 2 dimensional. And I just think there's so much, I just think there's so much innate beauty and just life force when we have these like symmetrical looking motions and like strength. Like I think it's the human condition is just, attracted to it, and it's a beautiful thing to participate in and grow with. And, so I could talk about it all day. So,
awesome. I enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Any last ideas about what you have inside of you that needs to be taught out in the world?
Nothing that's too specific right now. I think that, especially since you have, a pretty diverse group that listens to this, I think it's always important that we learn from each other, and sometimes people will get very stuck in their realm and say, well, I'm a PT, so I'm going to do this, or I'm a chiropractor, so this is all I'm going to look at. I'm just doing the exercise. And I think we really need to be able to look and see, well, who's good at what they do and what can I add to my practice by having conversations with them. So realizing that we're all, it sounds a little corny, but we're all kind of in it for the same purpose, to try to help people to be better and to be more efficient at whatever they do. So I think just learning from each other is huge. So hopefully you get a good diverse group that listens to this and can take something away from it.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't had many pro athletes come into my office excited to see their physical therapist. And that's in reference to you. I swear it's just not a thing. So, once, that kind of, once I realized that, I was like, oh, wow, that needs to be shown. Like, that needs to be out here. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it's not always, we don't always want to be seen as the ones that are working with people after they've been broken, and after they have these issues. We want to be proactive and trying to train them and teach them how to use their bodies better. So, hopefully there will be less negativity around, you're the PT, I hope I never get to see you. But, we want it to be, well, you should, because we're going to help you use your bodies better and hopefully become better at whatever it is that you want to do. Yeah.
It'd be nice to have PT as one of the first stops instead of the sixth,
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
All right. Thanks for having me. Good talking to you.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for hanging out with Seth and I. I really hope you are inspired as much as I was by that conversation. And the truth is, him and I are already corresponding on different aspects of training and development and sharing the best information with this audience. And I am truly, truly honored to, help you guys see this way of thinking fit and being fit. If you want to help out the podcast and support us, please check out Ladder and use our discount code BFIT10 to purchase your sports nutrition from a company that is dedicated to creating high performance, NSF certified for sport workout supplements and for supplements for daily use. These supplements support a good nutrition approach, right? You got to have good nutrition before you add supplements, and they're for athletes, right? So it was created by LeBron James and his trainer. It's, again, such an honor to be able to support the podcast and bring you guys high quality sports nutrition. So check them out at ladder.sport and use the code BFIT10 for your 10% discount. And you can save even more with a subscription to one of their high quality products. Thank you guys again for hanging out, and let us know what you're learning. Check out Think Fit, Be Fit podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and sign up for the newsletter. Like I said, we're diving deep into these concepts, and we want ongoing conversation. So we want to hear from you. We want to know what you want to learn, what you are learning, and how you're applying this information. So head on over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and hit the 5 stars, hit the subscribe button. Tell your friends and family why you love this podcast and how you're applying the information to improve your approach to fitness. Have a great week, and I look forward to hearing from you.